Today's guest is Dr. Katie Richardson. Katie is a pediatrician, longtime physician leader, and CEO of Lantern, a national nonprofit that delivers childhood development resources to parents through text messaging. Before that, she spent more than 15 years caring for thousands of pediatric patients and working inside large health systems where she saw firsthand how families respond when health and income stability are disrupted. Through her work with parents from pregnancy through preteen years, Katie has spent decades helping families think about planning, stability, and what happens when life doesn't go as expected. That makes her perspective especially relevant for a conversation about income protection and life insurance. So, Katie Richardson, welcome.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm
Sure.
excited to share more about my journey.
Yeah, so I was really excited, particularly to have you here because I think you work with a lot of families and a lot of different perspectives. So, obviously, you work with them in a medical perspective, but I think you also work with people when it comes to planning. And as we know, nothing usually goes according to plan. And
Sure.
so, I think a lot of things that sometimes get overlooked is the financial component to parenting. So, everybody's thinking about saving for college, or they're thinking about, what kind of things medically or how to raise their kids to be good people and all of those things. But I think a lot of the financial components are overlooked. And so I thought you were going to bring a unique perspective to talk about when you're working with these families, how that all looks. So,
Absolutely.
just to kind of get started, so what have you learned about how parents think about financial stability?
That's a great question. What I will tell you, and I do have probably two distinct vantage points on this. So, as you mentioned, um, I spent the majority of my career seeing patients at large integrated health system. And so I definitely have that vantage point. And I would say most of my families were middle class to upper middle class families that made up my practice. Um, in my work with Lantern, so we are a 30-year-old nonprofit here in Colorado, and we actually serve more than 500,000 families nationwide. Well, 65% or more of those families live in low income zip codes across the US. And so I can talk about both of those things as it relates to that idea of financial stability. I'm actually going to start with our kind of lower income lantern families because what we have really seen is an uptick in the number of families that are looking for resources to help support them. So, Lantern delivers kind of two types of content to families. The first goes along with a child's age and stage of development. And as you mentioned, it really is child development resources and information about parenting, sleep, nutrition, those types of things. And then we partner with community organizations across the country really to deliver local information to these families about low cost or free resources and events that are also happening in their community. I'll give you a few examples. So that could be things like diaper banks, food banks, immunization clinics, library story times. Here in Colorado, we partner with Rocky Mountain PBS, and so they put information out about their big Kids Fest that they do every year and free days at the museum or the zoo. So, all different types of events and resources that go out via our platform to these families. Well, what I can tell you is those more kind of basic needs, resources that are really pushing towards basic needs. We see that they are getting we look at click-through rates of our messages, including those about community resources, and those click-through rates have gotten higher and higher progressively. I mean, I would say from the pandemic and beyond, we really have seen those click-through rates rise on those more basic needs types of resources that we're
That's
putting
great.
out. Yeah, no, it is because, I think many times those families don't know where to turn. And so being able to kind of, as you mentioned, all of our information goes via text message to their mobile phones. And so having those targeted messages, so something within their zip code or county that they can take advantage of, I think is really important. I'm going to give a little bit of data also about a program that we did here in Denver. Much of our
Mhm.
piloting happens in Colorado since that's where we're based. But we did a program for families with food insecurity. And one of the things that was really surprising for me was not only the amount of families that signed up for our program, and we simply asked one question to our Lantern families. We said, would you like more resources to help you put healthy food on your table? So we didn't ask about their income. We didn't ask if they qualified for programs like WIC or SNAP. We just
Mhm.
said, would you like more resources? And I think some of the surprising results that we got. So I know we had families, kind of across the economic spectrum that were, again, still looking for additional resources to help them put healthy food on their table. But one of the amazing things, I think, 75% of families that were in that program really said they learned more about federal programs that could help
Wow.
them with getting healthy food for their table. Um, More than 85% said they learned about local resources too that could help them
So
get.
the messaging hadn't really been there on how to get the resources,
I
really.
think
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah.
I think that's true. And as economic times change, I really feel like families that may not have qualified previously now might be in a place where not only do they have those needs, but they now need to know a little bit more about what those resources are. The last thing that, just warms my heart is the fact that 75% of our families in that program said that they felt like we helped reduce their food insecurity because of the messages that we had been sending them. So I think a couple things. I think there's a large group of families that may not qualify for those federal resources or maybe had not qualified in the past and now may have a need for that. So education around what's
Mhm.
available is important. And then secondly, I think the other piece of it really is about, um, you have another group of families that are somewhere in the middle where, again, they're still feeling that, tension between how do I make sure that I can get healthy food and put healthy meals on the table for my family. And I think we had a lot of those families that were taking advantage of resources that, again, maybe they hadn't had in the past.
So what I'm hearing from you is just working with families, oftentimes, and you work with a lot of the low income families, but it's amazing how much financial stability or instability has an impact on the decisions that they make and maybe the stress level that they carry.
Yes, the U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy actually put out a paper, I believe it was last fall, that really was about parental stress and how much of what's happening, no matter where you are, I think on the economic spectrum, you're feeling a little bit of that tension,
Mhm.
and that does lead to increased stress, and obviously then that impacts how you show up for your kids and
Yeah.
all how you show up at work and all of those things. So I definitely think decisions are being driven by how people are feeling right now. The other thing that I've noticed just in my clinical work um, really is how families are making decisions about how financial, one's financial situation is really driving some of the decisions that families are making in healthcare. So, I would say early in my career or earlier in my career, you might make a recommendation. And again, this is even in my middle to upper middle class families. Historically, you might have made a recommendation for a test or an imaging study or something like that. And families would have, just said, okay. And, they walked out. But as more of the burden, as you know, of healthcare has fallen to us as consumers,
Hmm.
I find that families then are questioning, well, what is this going to cost me? And is this really
Is it
necessary?
even
And
covered? Yeah.
yes,
Is
is
that a
it
covered
covered?
expense?
All of those things. So I
Yeah.
think, at least in the exam room, that's the other thing that I've definitely seen across the economic spectrum is those decisions are being driven by cost, coverage, all of those types of things.
So you're seeing a lot of parenting decisions that, regardless of where they are sort of on that spectrum, are impacted by finances. Do we
Absolutely.
really need to get our kid texted for a sleep study? Do we
Right.
really need to have that imaging? Maybe they'll be okay.
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
now what about families, people, do they contact you before they actually have kids? Like they're thinking about having a family. What kind of goes into that process financially?
That's a great question. I think that should happen more often than it does. How about that?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you and I both have kids. We know, what it takes to raise a child. And um, I think the statistics would tell us based on, and I don't know how much of this is economically driven, but there are a lot of young couples who are deciding not to have kids these days. And again, that's probably multifactorial, but do economics play into that and the financial decisions? Absolutely.
Hmm.
Do they come to me as their pediatrician and ask me about those things? Not usually.
Yeah.
They're more when we get interviewed in that prenatal period. Those conversations are more about tell me your philosophy on immunizations and some of those types of things. There is oh my gosh, I'm gonna blank on it, and I should have thought about this. Because of my interest and excitement in healthcare innovation and technology, and then that crosswalking with families, there's actually, I think it's called Stork Fund, but there's actually a platform out there that I've been working with a young entrepreneur, and she's really helping families think about what are you going to need funding for as your child, grows and goes through those early years of childhood, right? So what do you need for the delivery itself, your pregnancy, any additional costs and the pregnancy, the delivery, and fingers crossed everything goes the way that it
Yeah.
should and you have a healthy baby, right? We'll make that assumption right there. But then it gets into potential educational costs, right? So, what are those additional costs that may come up during those years? And is there a way that we can help you save for some of those costs, or that she can help you save? Her platform can help you save for some of those costs. So, I don't think families think about, if your child has educational needs. By the way, yes, the school system definitely picks up
But there's
some.
still holes. You
There
still
are
might need
holes. There,
tutors or occupational
yes,
therapy or physical therapy or
yes.
whatever it
There,
is. There's a lot of extra costs.
There are a lot of extra costs. And then we get into, I'm a huge believer for kids that things like activities outside of school and sports,
Hmm.
opportunities to, learn skills on collaboration with other kids. And
Hmm.
not that the sport itself is the most important piece, but
But the
keep
teamwork and the,
the
yeah.
teamwork and keeping kids active and all of that kind of stuff. I think the most, difficult thing in today's world is those sports get so competitive so early. And by the way, the cost is, in many cases, I'm going to go as far to say as outrageous, right? So for
Yeah.
many families, it's even, especially some of the ones that, I work with regularly, it's unaffordable for them to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. But those are things that I think should go into the planning aspect. Do you want your child to be able to have some of those opportunities? Of course, I think we would all say, yes, we do,
And
because
even the people that are on a higher income um, level, the amount that they're putting into sports, like right now, hockey, everybody's talking about hockey. I can't imagine how much money and time and
yeah,
effort went into those kids to get
yeah,
to that level. and the amount of
Yeah,
sacrifice that it took. It's got to
agreed.
be, I mean, yeah,
My daughter played softball. Is not going to be an Olympian, and is no longer playing in college at this point. But, it was a great opportunity for her to do. But guess what? Like, we had pitching lessons, we had batting lessons, we had all the things,
and the
that
travel and
and the
everything else,
travel,
and
all
the
that kind of
uniforms.
stuff. Like, yes,
Absolutely.
there
So
are,
even so, even like the people with a high income level, do you think a lot of them are still planning for, well, what if? Like everything's going
yeah,
according to plan, assuming that you're going to be healthy and you can still bring home an income. Or
yeah,
assuming mom and dad are both still work, something doesn't
yeah,
happen to either one of them.
yeah.
Have you ever seen situations where that can change on a dime?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, obviously, um, there are accidents, there are health issues, I'm a single mom. Went through divorce when my child was young. And so when you go from what was, a great dual income family to, all right,
Yes.
yes, I mean, he's still alive, so he's still contributing. Sometimes that's not always the case that but
Yeah.
you definitely feel that, and
But
I
there's
think
more economic pressure on you, and
absolutely
you also have to be on all the time.
yes,
You
yes.
can't just hand off and, you're the one that had to drive to all the softball practices and make sure the homework is done and
Yeah.
all of
What
it.
I will tell you, Jamie, I remember my biggest fear, and again, like, I'm a pediatrician, I had a great job, I had great benefits, all of those things, but my biggest fear going through my divorce is, am I going to be able to do this financially on my own? And again,
Mhm.
I have an ex-husband who has contributed all along the way, and so it's not like I was doing this,
But that's a
all on
real
my
change
own.
of course. Yeah, that's a
Yes, but
big,
it was a big change for me to be able to have to think about, okay, I need to make sure that what am I doing for college now for her, or planning for college for her? We were parents who started the 529 plan before our child was even born. So, again, thinking about what might she need in the future, but then after, I mean, we got divorced when she was 5. So still thinking about, working with a financial planner to say, how much do I think I'm going to need? And by the way, with the cost of college education, you know,
yes.
again, where it is today, when we were thinking back then, I never would have guessed that the cost of college is what it is today. Like, it just continues to go up.
It
So,
grows twice the rate of inflation.
oh,
Yeah,
it's
insane.
crazy,
Yes.
crazy, crazy.
So when you were going through that and you're saying, oh my gosh, my entire world is changing, everything is shifting, I'm terrified if something happens. Did you think, okay, well, I'm working at a place, my employer's going to take care of it if something happens? Or did you say, okay, I need to also make sure I can, if there's any gaps, that I'm taken care of?
I did both. I mean, I think it is an and. Um, I really thought I was one of those naive people who
Mhm.
thought, I'm going to stay at the same employer for a very long time. Well, that's just not what people do anymore.
Mhm.
And there were a lot of changes that happened at that employer that I was with for almost 16 years.
Yeah.
And so it was one of those things where, yes, it was my decision to leave when I did, but when you don't have that security, oh my gosh, I was very glad that from the start, I've always been someone who, has had things. Well, obviously, my job, I thought this will not always be here. We, had the availability of, or the opportunity to take advantage of a pension. Well, if I'm not there, that may not always be there. So don't count on some of those things. Make sure I'm doing other things on my own and planning for those things outside of my employer too. And it's good that I did,
Yeah.
because again, I made a decision that, all right, I don't think this organization aligns with where I am right now, and I made a decision to leave.
So
So
do you
now
think by making those decisions and doing some of those supplemental things gave you the ability to be more flexible and leave your employer?
a
Like
hundred,
being
100%. Yes.
So it gave you the latitude to say, you know what,
Yes.
I'm going to shift and I'm going to pivot and do something else.
100%. 100%. Um, yes. I mean, I'll throw in. I'm like, how much do you want to know about me? But
Mhm.
I was brought up by a single mom who, when I was in high school, we had creditors calling our house all the time. And
Yeah.
so I know what it can look like to have someone who hasn't planned. And so for me, it was very important from the very beginning to say, I need to make sure that no matter what happens, whether it be divorce, illness, any of those things, that I have really thought and made sure that, you know, I mean, I have one daughter, no, I only have one, but to make sure no matter what happens to me that she's going to be okay. And by the way, that I have what I need
Yeah.
if something happens to me, illness or, otherwise.
Do you
So,
think a lot of the, because you work with thousands and thousands of people, and it sounds like you've got it all, maybe don't have it all figured out, but based on your upbringing, you said, I'm going to learn from that and I'm going to do things differently. Do you think that there's enough awareness for a lot of people to think that way, to say, I can't always rely on my employer. I can't always rely on ex husbands. I can't always rely on different things. What do I need to do to ensure my family is going to be stable and okay if I die, if I become sick, if I get divorced, if?
yeah. I don't. I mean, in fact, so again, at Lantern, we serve families, right? They come from all walks of life. One of the things that I'm continuing to look for actually would be a partner that would help us get some more information out about financial education. In Colorado, you probably know this, but our state education system has decided that every high school student needs to take financial education in high school, which I think is a great
That's
starting
fantastic. I
point.
think
Yes,
some financial literacy. Yes.
yes, a great starting point for those kids. I don't know how many other states do that, but I think there's a lot that we can do, as we try and help these families to also get information out. I think financial literacy is not everyone gets it. Not everyone has had the opportunity to learn about it. Not everyone has, learned the lessons of their parents and decided to do things differently, live within their means. I mean, the number
Yeah.
of people, even I think, higher wage earners that are not living within their means. Again, for me,
Sometimes they're worse off than the low income people.
yes,
I mean,
you
we
are
see it
right.
all the time. They live
Yeah.
way beyond, and so they got to insure beyond and everything
Yeah.
else and everything. It's just they've just upped the ante. It's just a
Agreed.
different scale. They just have
Yeah.
fancier cars and this and that, but they're under the
Right.
same level of stress. So what do you think is the best way to educate people? I mean, it sounds like at least there's some, financial literacy for the young people, but what's the best way for people to kind of on a large scale be educated to say if something happens to me, if I can't work, if something happens to me and I die, how do
Yeah.
we educate people?
Well, that's a great question. I really want to turn that back on you because you probably know more of the resources that are available as opposed to me. For me, it was seeking it out. Seeking out, I would never say, I was someone that knew all of this. I knew what I didn't want. And so, my I bounced one check in college and I remember I almost like lost it. But ever since then, like, no, this is how I manage my money on the day to day. But then beyond this, I want to make sure that I'm not like my 80-year-old mother right now who is trying to make it work on $36,000 a year.
Yeah.
Social Security plus a little bit more. I want to make sure that I have that. So I sought out professionals like yourself to educate myself. And I think not everyone has the time or opportunity to do that, but I think it's a really important thing. Um, but yeah, I would ask you, what other resources are out there for people?
Well, I think there's a lot of misconceptions because I think people think, oh, life insurance, that's for rich people. I can't afford it, which they don't realize it's the same cost as their Apple Care on their phone. So
Right.
people get an iPhone and they spend $360 to insure it when the phone's worth $1,000. But for $360 a year, they can get $1 million of term life
Yeah.
insurance or something so I think I don't know if I have the actual answer. I mean, I think there needs to be content out there. There needs to be messaging out there for people of all walks of life. Because again, the
Yeah.
people with the fancy car that are living to their limit, they need it just as much as people that are one paycheck away from being sick or injured and they can't work. I mean,
Agreed.
the largest reason that homes foreclose is based on illnesses. People are one
Yeah.
paycheck away from not being able to pay that mortgage or their rent. And
Well,
so it's terrifying. And so people need to realize, what do you have through work or what do you not have? I
yeah.
also think that, and you might see this too, I think a lot of people are doing more gig work. They're not necessarily working for an
Yeah.
employer that's taking care of them. Maybe they're working three different jobs. They're waiting tables here and driving Uber, and they're not getting benefits. And
Yeah.
so they're even more vulnerable for
Yeah.
something to happen.
Well, and I will tell you, I've been in my current role at Lantern for the last 3 years, but as I look at especially what comes for me between when I would like to retire and 65, because I do think I will retire before then, the things that are happening with health insurance and your ability to get some of those benefits as a gig worker in the gig economy, those types of things, I think it's becoming harder and harder. And it will drive decisions. I know for me, it absolutely will drive the decision. So
Mhm.
um, I it's something that I hope we see change over time, but especially think health insurance for the most part. But you're right, all of the other benefits that come alongside
Yeah.
that you're not also going to have. Um, this is why, to your point, like some of my insurance is definitely and always has been outside of my employer because even if I'm not working, at an employer that offers those benefits, I know that I still have those things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you seem like somebody who's taken a lot of self responsibility based on your upbringing, your mom's modeling for you. And so you did
Yeah,
things differently. But I think a lot of people could benefit hearing your story, because I think that a lot of people, they've just never really thought about it before, about, well, what if something happens? Or they just think, oh, well, my spouse will take care of me, or whatever it is. So it's
yeah,
really, it's kind of scary. So,
yeah.
yeah.
And I would say, despite what I've done, in my financial realm, I'm not an over planner. Like there are a lot of people who have, right, like my brother can't go on vacation for at least a year because he's got the next year planned out. I'm not that person.
Yeah.
But I do
Very few
know
people are. Yeah.
but I do know, like, I can give him a hard time.
Yeah.
But I do know that, there are some things that are really important, and I wanted to make sure you said it. You talked about the iPhone and, that kind of stuff. It comes down to choices, right? We have choices to make. And so what are the things that, what are the basic things, if you have the means and ability to do so, that you want to make sure are in place? Find out, what's most important. Some of that is based on your own internal values and that kind of stuff. Need for security and, other things. But I think seeking it out and trying to get that information early on in your life is really important. So my
Yeah.
hope, and knock on wood, so far, my 21-year-old seems to be doing great. She has her first credit card. She has actually three different bank accounts for a variety of different things that she's taking money out of one of them to pay her college bills and, other
Wow.
things. But teaching that at a young age, I think is really, really important. And her accounts are still under my account. So every once in a while, I'll be like, I'll get an alert that says insufficient funds. And I'll be like, what? So then I go in quickly to look, and I'm like, oh, it's because my daughter, paid something on Venmo, overpaid people on Venmo, and, didn't plan that coming out of her checking account. But she's learning those things, I think, at this age,
Yeah.
which I think is super important.
Yeah. And I think so. What I'm hearing from you, yeah, I think teaching people at a young age, I think the habits that you create and the values that you get will carry through your adult life. I think that that's really important. And it does sound like a lot of these families, when they're doing family planning and parenting planning, a big component should also maybe be that financial part for planning what if, because
Yeah.
everything is great if it goes according to plan. But as you and I know, that doesn't always happen.
No, it doesn't. No,
So,
it doesn't.
so we're going to take a quick break. Hold on, I need to look at whatever the time is. It's not telling me. Okay. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk about how parents can think about income protection and life insurance in real world terms and what makes these decisions feel overwhelming in the first place. All right. Now it's all right. We're back with Dr. Katie Richardson, pediatrician and CEO of Lantern, a national nonprofit focused on helping families build strong foundations for their children. All right. So, after everything you've seen in your career working with families, what would you want families to understand most when it comes to financial planning for their future? Like,
I
what's the
mean,
biggest takeaway that you think that they should? If a new if a new family comes to you and they're saying, "Okay, we're so overwhelmed, we're starting a family," give us the top three things we should be thinking about.
well, I would say start early, right? So it's never too early to start thinking about the planning aspect from a financial perspective. Um, I would say engage professionals in the conversation. Most of us did not get the education that we need to make the decisions. And so find some trusted professionals to help you make some of these decisions, I think is also important. And um, don't feel scared to ask questions. Like, I always, I would say, even in my marriage, my ex-husband did much of that kind of stuff. It wasn't something that I always say, especially like with my investments and stuff like that. I'm still like, I pay somebody else to do it because I don't have the knowledge or the expertise to be able to do it. And frankly, I'm not interested in learning
Yeah.
all that much about it. I want
So
to edge.
outsource. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, yes, outsource.
Yeah.
And don't feel bad about asking questions. Um, I guess those would be probably the top two things. I don't know if I can come up with a third.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
So I guess my last question is maybe tell me a story. What is your favorite story about a family that was helped by Lantern?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, we get stories back from our families all the time. And I'll go back to what I talked about, our meal program for families with food insecurity. And they it's the things that at least there are some days I don't think about these things, but there was a family that said exactly what we're talking about here. Like someone in the family, I think it was the dad, had lost their job.
Mhm.
So they had things turned on a dime and they heard about our program. They signed up for our program. They were so grateful for the resources. The fact that they could take a look at each resource and find something. They didn't have transportation. So find
Mhm.
something that was in the nearby vicinity to be able to help them through that very difficult time, I think was absolutely amazing. And the other thing they really liked about it, and this is where, um, I think we don't think about these things sometimes, but there's a lot of shame that comes along with, um, feeling like you need to ask for help. I would say, if I can do anything, it would be taking that away. But what they
Yeah.
really loved about our program is the fact that they could they could search, these things right there. We would send it right to them. They would know where to go, what to look for, and that kind of stuff. And it seemed very private to them and didn't have that same shame as is attached to potentially. going
They're
somewhere
not
and
standing in a bread
asking.
line or something.
Yes,
Yes,
exactly,
yes,
exactly. Many of these food pantries and that kind of thing, you can actually now make appointments at and that
yeah,
kind of thing. But it was exactly the type of story that you're talking about. I mean, things just really turned on a dime for them, and they were so grateful for what we could help provide for their family,
yeah,
which
yeah.
obviously
I
is
mean,
heartwarming.
it's so interesting because a lot of what you do is actually pretty similar in some ways to what we do with income protection because people call me and they were diagnosed with something or they were in an accident and oh my God, I know I need to file a claim. And they're almost ashamed. I'm like, that's what
Hmm.
it's for. That's why you have it. And thank goodness you do. And so thank goodness
Yeah,
they have the resources from you to be able to fill in those gaps
yeah,
because it's going to make a difference. And it's rewarding to be able to have a solution for somebody when times are tough. That's so gratifying.
absolutely. Yeah.
That's the
No,
most
you're
gratifying
you're
part.
exactly right. The shame is high, and I could see it in the same position, but that's why I would say, yes, this is why we're here to you. This is why you have this insurance or, whatever. You absolutely should take advantage of it. Um,
Yes,
I
exactly.
have a recent story of a friend who actually had, again, a disease. She actually was, or unemployed, and got diagnosed with a
Yeah.
disease and, is in a place right now where disability is going to be something that she needs for the for the fu foreseeable future, I would say, actually, for the rest of her life. But
Yeah.
one of the things that, of course, I'm here to be the positive, uplifting. How can I support you? What can I do to help you? But what I really see is, again, does she have some shoulda, coulda, wouldas in her mind about she has a kiddo in high school who, is going to go to college and all of those things. And, I would say up until this diagnosis, she had done a lot of things right, but she's at a place right now where she's going to have to, and I pushed hard from the beginning. The things like disability are here to help and support you. And you can't work. So, yes, you need to take advantage of it. And to your point, there is no shame in that. It's available.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah. It's got to be really tough though to get over
yeah,
that hump. Yeah. So,
for
well,
sure.
thank you, Katie. Thank you for being here and sharing all of your stories. I really appreciate it. It was really interesting to kind of see things from your perspective. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Jamie. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.